Welcome to Straight Talk for Real Life, produced by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Between the pandemic and those normal day-to-day challenges that we had even before the pandemic, many of us are struggling more than ever with stress, anxiety, and other emotional concerns. Today, we'll talk about how to release a superpower that can relieve that stress. We all know that engaging in arts can move us to feel something. But scientists today, looking at brain scans and brainwave technology, are able to see what music and art therapists have known for a long time, that the creative arts can have a powerful effect on the brain. Listen in, and we'll tell you how you can unleash a superpower that can improve your health and well-being. Hi there, I'm Bob Peacock. Welcome to Straight Talk for Real Life. You and I experience the world through our senses. We look at a beautiful sunrise or a star-filled night, and it gives us that sense of awe that makes us feel calm and relaxed. It can even happen when we see a piece of art, or when we hear a song or a line in poetry, or even when we smell certain scents that immediately take us back 20 years or more to Mom's kitchen. So as we experience life through our senses, these sensory experiences get processed by our brain. And our brain thanks us by releasing powerful feel-good chemicals that trigger those feelings of pleasure or calmness or even joy. This is all part of a field of research called neuroaesthetics. By looking at brain imaging and brainwave technology, scientists can see that certain areas of our brain light up when we engage in the arts, whether painting or photography, writing or reading literature, engaging in music, dance, and much more. It unleashes powerful chemicals in our brains that can improve mental health issues like depression or stress, and even help people increase productivity and innovation. Today, I'm honored to have one of the pioneers and well-respected experts in this field. Susan Magsamen is founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab from the Peterson Brain Science Institute at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Susan has written many children's and family books, and she's also the author of an evidence-based book titled Impact Thinking, which is about how we can use the creative arts to gain knowledge and solve problems in health, well-being, and learning. Susan, I want to start at the beginning. What is a simple way to explain neuroaesthetics?
Well, it's a big word, right? And you're kind of like, what? What does that mean? Well, let me start by saying that a shortcut for that is neuroarts. And we often talk about the neuroarts. And really, it's very simple. It is how aesthetic experiences, you mentioned these sensory experiences, and the arts measurably change the brain and body. And how, by knowing this information, it can be translated into practices that advance our health and well-being and even help us think about how we flourish and thrive. And I want to say that neuroaesthetics has been with us really since the beginning of humanity. Artists and philosophers have gotten there first in really knowing the power of these aesthetic experiences to help us transform and help us change. So in many ways, science is catching up with what we've intuitively known for centuries.
Let's talk about how you got into this field. You have a twin sister, Sandra, who is an accomplished artist and author today. But years ago, she had a serious accident when I think you were both in the fourth grade, and you experienced firsthand how art helped her healing process. Would you mind sharing that story?
Sure. My sister had an accident where she had a compound fracture in her leg and almost lost her leg. And the healing process required her to do something called home and hospital school. And in that program, they offered art classes. And my sister had never, created art before. We were pretty much nature kids, always outside, riding horses and really just playing outside. But she had to be in the house, and she started to draw and then ultimately paint. And what she was able to do was find a part of her voice and herself that she couldn't express verbally in any other way. And a lot of that had to do with her fears around the accident, isolation from school and kids, that a sense of, what the future would look like with a potential disability from an accident.
Right.
And so she was able to share that with me, and I was able to know her more deeply, in ways that even as a twin, we were born in conversation. So we intuitively knew how to communicate with each other. We still do now. But the power of visual arts in her case was so strong, that she continued to keep finding and sharing her voice through visual arts, and ultimately became an artist and also an author of illustrated books for children. So really was profoundly impactful for me. But as an artist making work, my interests moved more towards the empowering processes of making art and beholding art, and how that work really, in those creative exercises, whether you're good at it or not, and I think we get hung up in that in society, and I'm not good at it, so I shouldn't do it. But it's actually the process that's so transformational and so much about healing and growth. And so my work over the last now probably 40 plus years has been looking at the power of what happens when you're doing it, not so much the artifact that you create, which has its own life of its own, and how that happens, and how you experience that.
What happens inside our brains when we paint a picture or listen to music or when we dance?
Like nothing else humans experience, these kinds of aesthetic experience or art experiences alter complex physiological and psychological networks that are interconnected systems. So think about that for a moment. There is nothing that we do as humans that engages so many different systems and connects them together. So neural pathways, psychological mechanisms, thinking about the immune system and the endocrine system, the circulatory system, respiratory system, and even looking at sort of higher brain systems that could impact things like cognition or affect or reward and pleasure circuits, memory, and even motor systems.
Right.
So different art forms have the ability to interconnect similar systems and individual systems depending upon what art form you're thinking about. So when you're thinking about something like movement and dance, we know that those types of activities or engagements, meaningful engagements, engage the cerebellum, because they're engaging motor, but they also engage the hippocampus, because it turns out that motor learning actually has a huge impact on memory. So these systems are, it's not like one system happens at a time. There is a cascade of interconnectivity and immediacy that happens when those sensory systems are engaged, and that bring the world in. There's also a system called the default mode network, and that's a really interesting kind of universal system that we're learning more and more about. And it's basically the part of your brain that kind of connects the left and right hemispheres, but also the frontal cortex. And it's interested in that autobiographical. So what do you believe in? What do you like and dislike? What are your triggers? And so that part of the brain helps, along with other areas, look at what has meaning for you. So an example is, I might prefer jazz music and you might prefer classical music. Now, some of that's around conditioning, culture, life experiences, even genetics. But this default mode network starts to really kind of create your personal preferences and how you sort of act on those. And so we all have that kind of ability to be able to create preferential types of experiences that work best for us. So I can see over the next 10 to 15 years where we start to look at precision medicine around aesthetic experience and the arts. And we're already seeing that in aging populations when you're looking at mild cognitive decline or even dementia, where personalized playlists become triggers for opening up memory or helping someone engage where they haven't been able to find words, or even their language systems have been shut down. These personalized playlists are so powerful that they're able to open up pathways that have been shut down because of disease.
And when we say art, that includes not only like traditional painting, stuff like that, but also non-traditional art as well. Is that right?
Yeah, art is a word that I think trips us up sometimes. We think of art, high art, and maybe we think about museums or paintings that are professionally accomplished art. But art is really we organize art around 10 different categories. We think about visual arts, literary arts, media arts, or digital arts is another way to think about that. So film or even virtual worlds, performing arts, sound and music, dance and movement. And then we think about this idea of architecture and the built environment. Then there's artisanal, traditional handcrafts. We also look at culinary arts. Mm-hmm. And then I also include nature. Nature as an aesthetic experience is the ultimate art form. And a lot of arts take their cues from the natural world. And if you look at those sort of 10 broad categories, you can break those down into literally hundreds of subcategories of art. So, in visual arts, there's painting and there's drawing and there's collage, just, high level. In literary arts, there's poetry, there's fiction, there's short story, there's haiku. Every culture has a traditional handwork, and that cultural significance is so important in all of these different art forms. So what's wonderful about it is there are many ways to engage in the arts that as the maker or as the beholder. And, there's a passive active dance that we play always with these different experiences.
There is so much evidence about how powerful the brain can be when we use the arts to light up parts of the brain. There are many examples listed on the NeuroArts Blueprint website, which incidentally, you are also a co-director of the NeuroArts Blueprint Initiative in partnership with the Aspen Institute. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Let's talk about how the arts are helping people.
The body of literature, of scientific literature that's being developed over the last 10 years is becoming more and more robust. And it turns out that music is the most studied art. And I want to say, because I think this is really important, is that we're talking about brain research, but we're also talking about interdisciplinary studies. So when I think about the body of research, I'm looking at public health, I'm looking at cognitive neuroscience, neurology, neuroscience, psychiatry, psychology, public health, social work. There are many fields of study that are coming together to really understand this generative nature of the arts. And how do you study it? It's not a reductionist model. It really has to be studied, entering it in lots of different perspectives. So brain research is one way to understand it, but there's many other ways that we want to bring together. So you really create a quilt, if you will, of the way that something like music would affect different types of problems. And you mentioned impact thinking earlier in your introduction. So impact thinking is a framework. It is a way to systematically study an intervention, an arts or aesthetics-based intervention based on a problem. So music, for example, we know that music can improve cognitive function. We know that with people with dementia, we know that it reduces anxiety that's associated with other kinds of chronic illness. We know that it can relieve symptoms of trauma, and it can also improve motor coordination, specifically around Parkinson's disease, where it turns out that different types of rhythm and sound helps with gait. So if you are having trouble sequencing your gait, different rhythms will help with that, with Parkinson's, and we're seeing more studies around what's called dose and dosage. So how often how long a period of time you're dancing and how many times you're dancing with Parkinson's. We're seeing the more people dance, the more relief of symptoms they have, and the greater improvements in cognition, which is sort of extraordinary. We're also seeing that Parkinson's patients are doing more visual art, and that's helping them with motor learning, but also with reducing anxiety and increasing mood. And you think about voice and singing, anybody can do it. It is one of the most democratizing things that we can do, right? We can hum, we can sing, even if you're not good at it. And I always like to underscore that, because it's not about the talent, it's about the doing. For stroke patients, singing is really important. Also for COVID, singing is really important for building lung capacity. And so we're finding with pulmonary specialists, they're beginning to what's called socially prescribe singing. And there's some choirs, which I love, in England that have popped up called rubbish choirs, where people are singing together even though they can't sing, because it's so good for social connection and for making people feel less isolated. So another thing that COVID has done is made us feel isolated, and loneliness is totally on the rise, as is sort of this sense of vulnerability, and singing, just even singing through Zoom, allows people to feel more connected. And so, singing is a really sort of extraordinary superpower that we can do, in an instant.
And I love how NeuroArts has really impacted architecture and interior design, urban planning, things like that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, and this is where, you think about biophilic design. We know that people spend 95 to 97% of their lives indoors, yet it's the environment of light and sound and color and scent from the that's in the natural world that really keeps us incredibly healthy. So this area around bringing the outdoors in, or thinking about biophilic design, has really become quite well researched over the last 5 or 10 years. And we're finding certain types of light are better for attention, certain types of light are better for sleep. We know certain colors have a physiological effect on us. They also marry to cultural identity around color. So an example is red is the most physiologically arousing color. And that would make sense because historically in early cultures, soil was often had a red tint, and certainly blood is red. And so red was a color that we had a high physiological response to. But it turns out that as cultures grew and changed, these colors have significant meaning beyond physiological feeling. So, red in China is mostly associated with luck and with good fortune. In the United States, red means stop. So color is a very interesting one. We're doing a project at Hopkins right now for recharge rooms, and we're building rooms for frontline workers where they can come in and have an immersive experience with projections of nature. So the rooms are very calming. We're working with a company called Muto that makes these exquisite pieces of furniture that allow you to just feel like you've been enveloped in a comfortable space, and then projecting these images that literally fill the room of woodlands and waterfall and ocean, along with sounds and music that lowers blood pressure and variable heart rate, and we think probably lowers cortisol. So to give people a physiological break to recharge. And these rooms are for 15 minutes. So we're getting, really, these recharge rooms around the country have gotten huge response from participants in feeling more at ease, but also a sense of gratitude for this ability to be able to just let go for 15 minutes.
Oh, they sound wonderful. Yeah, from my own experience, let's talk about stress here because I know a lot of people are feeling stress. Years ago, I decided just on my own to take an art class. So I started with some simple drawing classes, and then I later went into some watercolor classes. It was just an easy way to step away from the stress and focus my mind on something else for an hour or two. And it was almost like meditation to me. And at the time, I thought that art was simply a distraction from the busyness in my day. But your studies and neuroarts would suggest it's actually much more than just a distraction. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's really fair to say. Although I will say that I think distraction has gotten a bad rap because sometimes what you need is distraction, and that is as therapeutic as engagement. Sometimes we talk about the arts as entertainment, but entertainment is really about pleasure and reward and joy.
Right.
And I think we've commoditized these art experiences to think about them as more commerce, and entertainment is something that's a nice to have, not a have to have, or even distraction is a nice to have, not a have to have. But really, we need those as human beings. We need them because when we're distracted, we're allowed to mind wander, and mind wandering is really where creativity happens. We're allowed to allow ourselves to move into these different states of well-being and different states of imagination. And so I think that the next wave of mental health, but also this idea around well-being and flourishing, is going to be redefining the states of mind that we need to really feel whole, and I think that's really exciting. There are certainly, I'll give you an example. There's a product on the market. It's a virtual reality world called Snow World. It was created by some folks out at University of Washington, and it's used for pain relief. So what they're finding is that the brain can only attend to one thing at a time. While we think we're multitaskers, it's really hard to do. And so when you have a stimuli like Snow World, which is a highly immersive experience with penguins in the snow, there's a narrative, and at the same time, someone is changing bandages from a serious burn. You're not feeling the pain as much, which means you don't need as much pain medication, and you're distracted. You're distracted to something else. So I like the idea of thinking about how we play around with those concepts of, what's the value of distraction in our world, and how we might optimize that through certain kinds of aesthetic experiences.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned it before. There's going to be a lot of people who say, hey, I'm not creative. I can't draw a stick figure. And yet these people are very creative from a tech innovation standpoint, but maybe they've never taken an art class or a cooking class. From your experience, do you have to be an artist to gain the same benefits? And what would you say to that person who says, I'm not an artist, this isn't for me?
So I love this question because I think it really is at the heart of why arts as kind of a basic, like nutrition, exercise, sleep, it's not really sort of brought up as a pillar. And I think it's because of that hesitancy. And, often around 6, 7, 8 years old, this is when we start to sort of differentiate ourselves from others in terms of whether we're good at something or not. And a lot of times what happens is we start to self-judge, and we start to feel ashamed of what we're creating if we're not getting rewarded for it, we're not getting recognized for it. And so people stop creating, making many things because they feel like they're quote unquote not good at it. But what we hear is that 45 minutes of working on any art activity, and I will say that includes cooking, writing, dancing in your living room, singing in your shower, reduces stress hormones by 25%. And,
Wow.
Stress hormones are really identified as being, this is things like cortisol, around inflammation. And inflammation is one of the most damaging things that happen in our bodies, and so and lay the groundwork for all kinds of diseases and disorders. So trying to demystify and I think debunk some of the myths around making art and the value of that, or making things and the value of that. And, creativity is not about the end product either. It's about the process. So there's been a lot of work done in flow, where what flow is a primarily prefrontal brain activity, where in essence you're shutting down the critic in your brain, the part of the brain that is saying it's good or bad, and just allowing something to feel timeless and free moving, where there is no judgment. And in that space, whether you're designing software or hardware or solving engineering problems, that is a creative space, and it's really around the creative world. But if you can't shut off that critic, if that critic is always showing up, you can't really push out of the boundaries of convention or self-reflection, where you're monitoring yourself and limiting yourself. So, creativity and innovation happens when you are not judging, but you're really doing, and you're really going beyond places that you've been before.
And does looking at art or listening to music or reading a book have the same impact as actually doing the painting?
It can, and it can have other impacts as well. And so I think this is where talent can matter. It doesn't necessarily have to, but there's a number of studies that have been done looking at artwork and really observing. So just by looking at artwork, and that can be any artwork, it can be Rembrandt or it can be a child's piece of art, the ability to be a better observer and to understand what's happening, or what you think is happening, what your perception is that's happening in a piece of artwork, what the artist was trying to say, or what you're getting from that piece of art, can be very transformational. And also in analyzing art in a group settings has been becoming more prevalent, where you're able to perspective take by hearing what other people are seeing in a piece of art, and sort of seeing that there is more than one way to see the world. And so that's very mind altering. It's very mind expanding to be able to do that. With music, what we have found is that people don't have the same emotional resonance to the same pieces of music. So there's a scale called GEMS 9 that looks at rating different pieces of music against a 9-scale emotional response, from sort of feeling sadness to feeling joy. And what we have seen in some preliminary studies is that people don't hear music at the same emotional valence. Even though you might think, oh, that's a joyful piece of music, someone else might think that's a sad piece of music. And so there's a lot of range in what people feel when they're hearing even the same piece of music. And I think that's interesting. If you're listening to music that is atonal, you might say, well, that doesn't sound good. There's no rhythm, there's no pattern, which, humans are always looking for the pattern. Often atonal music can make you more alert because you're hypersensitive to not finding a pattern and trying to figure out, well, I have to kind of be more aware because I don't see that pattern happening. So I think it's very interesting how the beholder can have very different experiences. It also helps us to understand each other in context to the world around us that we see through all these different experiences.
Yeah, beauty really is in the eye of the beholder.
Is absolutely the truth. And, there are some universal sort of substrates, but I mentioned the default mode network earlier. That in some ways, beauty is in the eye of the default mode network, right? So each of us sees something beautiful, very different. And I think that's actually beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the proven benefits of engaging in the arts. What are some of the ways that the arts can help us?
On a very sort of practical level, they allow for self-reflection and mindfulness. They build self-confidence and empowerment and self-esteem. They can help us improve critical thinking skills and concentration. They can help us really understand complex, deep thoughts and deep feelings. They can improve physiological symptoms from disease. They can improve brain cognition, but also enhance mood and reduce stress. So from a mental health point of view, there are many substantial benefits to different types of art experiences. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think it's worth mentioning this idea of fostering social interactions and reducing loneliness and feeling a sense of community and connection and meaningful relationships. Reducing inflammation and enhancing the immune system is a hugely important benefit to any of these art forms. And I think some of the other physiological aspects of that, come around and thinking about some of these neurotransmitters and hormones like cortisol, or looking at dopamine, enhancing dopamine and serotonin. We have seen so much loss in the last year with COVID, and the role of the arts to help us grieve and to heal, I think, is part of the reason why we're seeing more use of the arts. I would say to the folks that are listening to this, if you reflected on something that you've done over the last year, and it might have been as simple as, dancing or making a dish that you knew your family would enjoy, or singing, or maybe writing in a journal, I would venture that many people have relied on some form of art or aesthetic experience to help them feel better. And it might even be sitting in a bright window, or planting something in a garden. So, the value, I think we're experiencing the values and the benefits of the arts, maybe more than ever, in a very conscious way.
Even build on that. The arts has been such a sense of comfort to people who are lonely and stressed out. And one of the strongest evidence for me was on your website at the Arts and Mind Lab, about how art has helped frontline workers in hospitals, doctors, nurses, paramedics cope with this warlike trauma that they have felt in treating COVID-19. It has to be one of the most stressful jobs on the planet. Can you share some of those stories?
Yeah, so the frontline workers in healthcare have certainly been battered. And so have the frontline workers in grocery stores and police departments and fire departments and, wherever someone has to show up, right, and really be present. And so one of the things that we did early on was try to begin to offer ideas and ways that they could simply access the arts. And what we've seen is groups that are working together come together in small singing groups, or creating a book club where they're listening to part of a book on audio on their way into work, and then being able to communicate with each other about how that book has made them feel about what they're experiencing. Some people have put lavender in their pockets and pull it out and smell a sachet of lavender to really help them feel instantly sort of settled, because that scent has been something that's been really helpful to them. I think that because frontline workers are exhausted, we have been trying to find things that can be really immediately available and immediately helpful in addressing some of these burnout, but stress, anxiety, fear. You've seen a lot of the stories where people have stood on balconies and sung to healthcare workers. That's a really great example of where experiencing art and having that meaningful experience expressed in gratitude has gone such a long way for healthcare workers in particular.
Yes.
And so I think we're going to continue to see the need for these experiences over the next several years as we move into different stages of COVID.
Susan, this has been so fascinating. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you feel that your own well-being has slipped a bit during the pandemic, you're not alone. We just want you to know that engaging in the arts has been a real source of comfort to many people who are stressed, afraid, or grieving. I know the pandemic has made it difficult for us to try new things, but please don't let that be an excuse that stops you. Attend a virtual workshop where you can dance or create something. Take virtual classes or watch tutorials on any kind of art that you'd find interesting. My hope is that by engaging in the arts, either actively or passively, you'll discover that it can make a difference in your life. HPE's For Real Life initiative continues to offer a wide range of options to help you cope with life, including support through our Employee Assistance Program for both team members and your families. We're also focused on finding new ways to help you build strength to continue your journey so we can be the best we can be individually and collectively. HPE is committed to supporting our team member community with great resources. By listening to today's episode, you're one of the nearly 40,000 people who have listened to this podcast, and I just want to say thank you. I hope you continue to listen to past and future episodes. As always, if you're in the U.S., HPE provides many useful wellness resources on HPE Wellness, and if you're outside the U.S., you'll find them on the Global Wellness page. Until next time, thank you for taking the time to listen. It's always great to be with you. Let's talk again soon.